When the Moon Forgets to Rise, a tale of love, betrayal, reincarnation, and the fates that bind us across lifetimes and unforgiven goodbyes. It had been 7 years since young Mira last heard from him. In those years, she had tried not to think about him. She had built her life around the quiet routine that gradually became more familiar. She lived in a small apartment near Anguk Station, where the streets were narrow and the buildings old. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place people passed through without noticing. Yet for Mira, it was home. Her job at the publishing house kept her busy. She read manuscripts, edited drafts, and wrote comments on pages filled with other people's words. She lost herself in the rhythm of work, the flow of deadlines, and the hum of office chatter. On weekends, she took the bus to Incheon to visit her parents. The bakery she stopped at on the way was the same one she had frequented since childhood. Time passed in the usual way. One season melted into the next, and the years stacked on top of one another until they became a distant blur. Yet no matter how much time passed, there were memories that lingered, like shadows that never fully disappeared, always just out of reach. He had left in the early spring, when the air was still cool and the trees had yet to bloom. It was the kind of morning that felt like it could last forever, gray, still, and calm. She remembered how quiet the world had seemed then. It wasn't that it felt heavy, it just felt suspended, like everything had paused for a moment and nothing would ever move again. Their apartment had been small but cozy. It was on the top floor of an old building in Yeonam-dong, tucked between narrow streets that wound through the city like veins. The windows were large and they let in plenty of light. It had been his idea to move there. He said he liked the view, the quiet street below, and the way the city stretched out beneath them. He was a photographer, always looking for the perfect shot, always on the hunt for the right moment. "I love this city just before it rains," he had told her once. "The light's different, it's softer, quieter. You see things you'd miss in the daytime." Mira had smiled, watching him fiddle with his camera, always searching for something elusive. He liked to capture things that other people overlooked, little moments of beauty. He'd take a picture of the way sunlight hit the side of a building, or the way the leaves on a tree rustled when the wind picked up. Sometimes he would take photos of her unposed, natural moments. She would never know when he was taking them, and sometimes she would forget about them entirely. She had always been the quieter one. While he moved through life with a kind of restless energy, Mira found comfort in the stillness. She liked order, she liked routines. She kept things in their place, books on the shelf, clothes in their drawers, everything aligned just so. He would laugh at her sometimes for being so organized, but he didn't mind. He liked that she balanced him out. The morning he left, there was nothing out of the ordinary. There was no argument, no final confrontation. He had just gone. When she returned to their apartment that evening, everything was different. The room felt emptier than it had ever been. The bookshelves, once filled with his photography books and his journals, stood bare. His clothes were gone. Even the lenses from his camera had disappeared. All that remained was the record player they had bought together and a note placed carefully beside it. It was an ordinary note. She didn't read it that night, or for a long time after. It wasn't because she didn't want to know why he had left. It was simply because the words felt too small to contain the weight of everything that had happened. The note remained folded in a drawer for years. It wasn't that she didn't want to know what it said, but reading it seemed like an admission that she was still waiting for him. And for years, she tried not to wait. The first year after he left was the hardest. Her friends and family never asked the right questions, but they still asked. "How's work? Are you doing okay?" they would say. The concern in their voices was so obvious it only made her feel more distant. She kept her answers short. She smiled more than she felt like smiling. She made excuses when they invited her out. She said she was busy or tired or had to work late. Anything to avoid talking about the one thing that hung in the air between them, the reason for his sudden departure. The seasons passed, each one bringing small changes, but the feeling of absence never left. The cherry blossoms bloomed and then fell. Summer arrived with heat that clung to the streets, and then autumn brought a cool wind that swept through the city, leaving the sidewalks covered in gold and red leaves. Winter arrived with its quiet beauty of soft snowflakes that blanketed the city, turning everything into something new, something unfamiliar. And with each season, she felt the weight of his absence more. There were nights when she woke up, heart pounding, as if she had been dreaming about him. She couldn't remember the details of the dreams, only the feeling that he was still out there somewhere, waiting. But as the months turned into years, she learned to live without him. Not because she wanted to forget him, but because she had no choice. She moved out of their old apartment and into a smaller one. The new place was quieter, further from the busy streets of Yeonam-dong. It was a different neighborhood altogether, closer to Anguk Station, where the streets were lined with older buildings and small cafes. The change felt like a small act of self-preservation. She could no longer live in the place where they had shared so many moments, where their lives had intertwined so completely. But even in the new apartment, he lingered. His presence was everywhere on the bookshelves, in the photographs that still hung on the walls, and in the places she kept the things he had left behind. She began to take walks again, trying to ease the heaviness she sometimes felt in her chest. She walked through Bukchon-hanok village, past the hanok houses that looked as if they had been frozen in time. There was a bench she visited often, sitting in the late afternoon when the sun began to dip behind the city skyline. From there, she could see the rooftops below, the distant hum of the city, and the occasional passerby. It was a place that felt safe and quiet. She liked the way the world felt small from that spot, as if she could sit there forever and never have to face the things she had lost. The memories of him had begun to fade, not because they were any less important, but because the passing of time had made them feel less urgent. She no longer cried when she thought of him. The sharp edges of pain had softened, and what remained was a quiet nostalgia. She missed the way he had made her feel alive, the way he had filled the empty spaces in her life with light and laughter. But she had learned to live without it. She had learned to fill her days with other things, work, small pleasures, and quiet moments. And then one day, in a box of old books she was sorting through, she found a photograph. It was black and white, taken from behind. It was a picture of her, standing beneath an umbrella, her coat slightly turned by the wind. She had no memory of the moment, but when she looked at the photo, she could almost hear his voice. The memories flooded back in waves, the trips they took, the quiet evenings spent together, and the small moments they had shared that felt like the most important things in the world at the time. On the back of the photograph, he had written something, a short sentence, a few words, nothing more. Mira stared at the photograph for a long time. She had kept so many things in her life organized, each day neatly folded and filed away in the compartments of her mind. But this photograph, this moment reminded her that there was something messy, something imperfect, that had once been real. And in that quiet moment, as the rain fell softly outside, she allowed herself to feel the ache that had been buried deep inside her for so long. She didn't cry, but she didn't look away either. The days that followed Mira's discovery of the photograph seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if time itself were dragging its feet. The rain that had gently fallen the day she found it continued to fall on the city, soft and persistent, as though nature itself were mourning the passing of something precious. Mira could not ignore the weight in her chest, the quiet sense of longing that had stirred to life once again. She thought about the photograph constantly. It lingered in her thoughts, in her dreams. The image of herself, standing beneath an umbrella in the rain, was both a memory and an impossibility, a piece of the past that she couldn't quite reach, but still felt in every fiber of her being. Though Mira had convinced herself she was moving forward, she knew deep down she wasn't. She was still caught in a web of the past, tangled in the memories of a love she couldn't quite forget. She had never let go of him, even when she pretended she had. The soft yearning never truly dissipated. It just faded into the background noise of her life. And so she walked. The streets she had once strolled with him were now eerily quiet without him. The familiar sights of Bukchon-hanok village, the same street vendors, and the distant hum of the city, none of it seemed to bring her comfort. It felt as though the city had been altered in her absence, transformed into something alien and distant. Every step she took was heavy, as if the weight of time itself was pushing against her. She had no specific destination on these walks. She wandered through the neighborhoods, passing by the small cafes where they had once sat, sipping coffee, discussing art, life, and everything in between. Now it was as though the conversations had happened in another lifetime, in a version of her life that had long since closed. And then one day, she saw him again. It was late afternoon, and the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow across the city. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the smell of wet pavement and the soft shimmer of puddles reflecting the fading light. Mira was walking along the same street she had walked countless times before. She wasn't expecting to see him, but then, as though the universe had decided to return him to her, he appeared. He was standing on the other side of the street, his back turned toward her. His silhouette was familiar, the same tall frame, the same posture she had memorized years ago. Her heart stopped for a moment, and she stood frozen on the sidewalk, unable to take another step. He didn't seem to notice her at first, his head down as he walked with a purpose, unaware that she was only a few feet away. But as the seconds passed, as the world around her grew still, he turned. Their eyes met across the street, and for a brief moment it felt as though nothing had changed. That same warmth in his gaze, that same knowing, unspoken bond that had once held them together. But the instant was fleeting, and Mira was suddenly overwhelmed by the silence. Her body was frozen, her heart racing in her chest, but she couldn't bring herself to move. He crossed the street, his footsteps slow and deliberate, each one heavier than the last. When he reached her, he stopped, just a few feet away, as if waiting for her to make the first move. But she couldn't. The silence between them was suffocating. It felt as if all the years between them, all the things unsaid, were hanging in the air like thick fog. They stood there, facing one another, neither one of them knowing what to say or how to begin. Mira felt an ache in her chest, the kind that had become all too familiar. Finally, it was he who spoke first, his voice quiet and hesitant. "I didn't think I would ever see you again." Mira didn't know how to respond. What could she say? The years between them had built a wall that could never be torn down by a few words. The absence of his presence in her life, the ache that had grown in the hollow of her chest, felt like a deep wound that had never truly healed. There was so much she wanted to say, but no way to express it. The words seemed inadequate. She began, but the words caught in her throat. He shifted on his feet, his gaze dropping to the ground for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mira. I should have come back sooner. I know I hurt you. I know I left without a word, and I don't expect you to forgive me for that." His voice faltered, and she saw the pain in his eyes. The years of regret were evident in the way his shoulders slumped, the way he seemed smaller somehow, as though time had taken something from him too. Mira began again, but this time there was nothing left to say. The silence between them stretched, both of them standing at an impasse, trapped in the weight of the past. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said softly, "but I couldn't come back. I thought it would be better this way, for you, for me." Mira swallowed hard. She wanted to reach out, to say something, but her hands were trembling, her body stiff. She hadn't known she'd still been waiting for him until this moment, until the sight of him standing before her, as if he had never left. But the truth was, nothing was the same. Not him, not her, not the world they had once inhabited together. And then, as if the universe had decided that their reunion was destined to remain incomplete, a car came speeding down the street. Mira barely had time to react before the vehicle slammed into him, the sound of tires screeching and metal crashing against flesh and bone filling the air. Time seemed to freeze. His body was flung forward, crashing to the pavement with a sickening thud. Mira stood there in shock, her heart stopping as she watched him crumple in front of her, the blood pooling beneath him. People began to scream, their voices blending with the roar of the car speeding away, disappearing into the distance. But all Mira could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, her mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. The world felt like it had unraveled. She rushed toward him, her legs shaking, her hands trembling as she knelt beside him. His eyes were open, but they were distant, unfocused. He was still alive, but barely. The faintest breath escaped his lips, and Mira's heart broke all over again. She didn't know what to do, how to stop the bleeding, or how to make the pain go away. In that moment, she realized that they had never been given a chance to truly speak, to truly understand one another. The silence that had defined their love had now become something insurmountable, a wall that neither of them could climb. She had spent all these years mourning his absence, and now that he was here, it felt as though she had lost him again. This time, there would be no chance for reconciliation, no opportunity for healing. His breath grew shallow, each one weaker than the last, and as Mira looked into his eyes, she saw the flicker of recognition, a fleeting understanding. A sad smile tugged at his lips, the same smile he had worn when they first met, so many years ago. It was as if he was saying goodbye, as if he knew this was the end. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Mira shook her head, her tears falling silently as she held him close, as if her embrace could somehow stop the inevitable. But it was too late. The light in his eyes faded, and with it, everything she had once hoped for in the future, the love, the memories, vanished into nothing. He was gone. And Mira was left standing in the pouring rain, holding the photograph that had once represented a memory, a hope, a promise. But now it was just a symbol of all that could have been and all that was lost. The city continued on around her, indifferent to her grief, indifferent to the love that had once existed between them. She was left with nothing but the silence and the cold, empty space where he used to be. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself was weeping for what had been lost.